irrigated that in December, so mid-December. So hydrilla grows great. It grows better than any other plant. Well into December, sort of dies in January most years, and it does that. It just disappears. But obviously it can come back to the tubers and the thing. So that's what, right now we've cleared it out of the big inlet in Keoga at Ithaca, which is 160 acres, 70. And we cleared it out of Fall Creek, a very fast-moving stream. But over the years, hydrilla has made it out into the lake, and so we're working on the south 800 acres, trying to find the needle in the haystack. So that's where we spend most of our time. We work quite a bit on Chautauqua Lake in western New York, and this year we're doing a little more monitoring last couple of years because there's a big controversy there between the use of herbicides and how they manage the lake. They're a lake that normally uses a mechanical harvesters. That's their main thing. They have the largest harvesting operation east of the Mississippi. Used to be the TVA, but now it's the Chautauqua Lake. But there's also a group that wants to resurrect the use of herbicides, which they did a lot of in the 50s and maybe a little bit in the 60s. So we're involved in that, mainly monitoring, but giving some advice. So we do that. And to start, and I would have been long retired too. In fact, I retired from Cornell officially in 2008. And stayed there a couple more years. But then when 2011 hit and they found this hydrilla in Keoga Inlet, I think I got the first sort of email that was answered on that project was mine about 11 o'clock at night. They had found something down in a water bottle, a little piece. And the young lady thought it was a Brazilian Eladia, which looks very close. But then we went down the next day, and hydrilla was everywhere. I don't spend a lot of time downtown Ithaca or at the farmer's market where it was really dense. So that was a surprise. And then I was a volunteer for a year and a half, maybe, with that project, trying to get things started, but then they decided they needed somebody more involved. We needed bigger crews. We tried volunteers in the beginning. We still have volunteers working on hydrilla, obviously, but it ended up that I needed to get a business going and employees and so forth. And so that's where we are today. So we get that going. So I just we got that. Can everybody see that and hear me? Yeah, I got that. So one of the things here, this is one that Paul Orton and I put together a long time ago for aquatic plant management managers and so forth, and more taxonomists. There's some taxonomy in here which I wouldn't worry about too much. But it's also for practical applications to lake associations and so forth. The thing I always want to point out, there's lots of references, and so if you come up here, these two here, which you see around here, are sort of the ultimate authority. These books by Crow and Hellquist. Hellquist is still, Barry Hellquist, still active and a member of our organization. Those who are going to get into taxonomy are really the thing. This one through the looking glass, many of you probably have this, but this is excellent. And then there are other ones out there that have been online and may still be the main guide of invasive plants. So there's lots of resources out there to look at. And so that's where we go. And so one of the first things we do when we're out, and we have some unknown samples you look at later and sort of dig through. And we also had some samples brought to us today that we'll check out. But one of the first things you look at are the leaves. And so this happens to be a similar kind of leaves. These are actually leaves, they're dissected leaves. And so that sort of gives you a key right away that none of these are pond weeds or potamogetans. And so we have things like, coontail up here, milfoil here, ranunculus down here, and fanwort here, kabamba, and so forth. So those are things you can see from pictures and stuff that they're different. Another thing is if you have an unknown plant and you want to send it to somebody somehow, I actually, if people send stuff to me, I actually have them send it to me in a Ziploc bag, but I make sure they don't put any water. You never want to put any water in a Ziploc bag, not necessarily to help the postman, but you just don't want it in there because if you have water with your aquatic plant, they're going to decay very rapidly. So even the plants we have today here, we've had in the refrigerator for a week to 2 weeks. We do not have any water in those plants until now. We've added some water to here. The other thing is you can use, like here, suggested use a scanner, take a scan of the plant, and then send this to somebody to do a first cut ID of the plant if it's something that you need to know and whatnot. And I think it's even in the hydrilla thing, you can't imagine the plants that are coming in from hydrilla volunteers from around the state as hydrilla. I mean, some of them don't even look like it, some of them are even emergents. So this is kind of make the first cut, or you can send it to somebody, or in everybody's lake, there's too many weeds, all right? For some people, it's like, so, and then all weeds are bad, all aquatic plants are bad. So we're trying to get people to be a little more on the alert for what's out there. So one of the things you do when you first, this little text, I'm looking at the thing, if you were using a book or something, or a taxonomic book, you look at these things for identification, and one of the things you do first is you look at the leaves. Obviously the leaves of polygetans are very different from Eurasian water milfoil, and when you get into things that look like Eurasian water milfoil, we get a lot of people sending Elodea in as Eurasian water milfoil, and so forth. But there are plants that look exactly alike, such as Cayuga Lakes hydrilla and Cayuga Lakes Elodea. They're almost indistinguishable. They'll be distinguishable here today, but when we're on Cayuga Lake, and we have a lot of Elodea, and some years we do, it takes us forever to go through a sample, a big pile of sample every time you do a rake toss to find that hydrilla. And it just turns out that Elodea natalii looks exactly like young hydrilla. So first look at the leaves. Stems will give you things, a good idea. Roots, obviously if you've got a big tuber root or something, maybe that's a lily or a nufar, some floating leaf plant. And then when you get into more detail, you're trying to figure things out a little more. You look at the flowers. That, if you're looking at that with a microscope or something, that means you're really into taxonomy and doing that. And sort of the seeds are really the key for polygatans. We have polygatans that we have looking at in Chautauqua Lake that are extremely difficult to identify early in the season. We did our big survey out there in May and June. And so polygatans are just rapidly growing at that time, very little tiny green things. They all look alike. And so you sort of, in some cases, have to wait until they produce seeds, which is now mid-season to late season, to get the ultimate decision on what these things are. Leaf arrangement, obviously another taxonomic thing that if there's an issue with leaves are opposite. If you have a NYIS in here, which a lot of people confuse NYIS flexilis, NYIS guadalupensis, they confuse with Elodea. NYIS has 2 leaves, and so we look for that 2 leaves and not a whirl of leaves. Like Elodea has generally 3 leaves around it, and Cayuga, what confuses us sometimes is we have a 4-leaf Elodea, which confuses us when we get to looking for hydrilla, which normally has 5, but can have 5 to 8 leaves sometimes. So leaves are a quick thing to look at. Leaf margins, leaf midrib. Midribs are important when you're looking at all these various polygaetans in the lake, and where you're looking at Stachynia, which used to be Polygaetan pectinatus, it's now Stachynia pectinata. That's a cylinder kind of leaf and doesn't have that midrib, so you want to look at that. The other thing is, for example, a clasping base of that. One of the things that we're having a lot of confusion with in Chautauqua Lake with the group that's managing the herbicides is they identify things very differently than we do sometimes, and so they have claimed that there's a Polygaetan Richardsonii in the lake, which has a clasping leaf and turnaround. Now we've been there since 2002, and I have not found Richardsonii anywhere in the lake. What they have there is white-stemmed pondweed, which is Polygaetan pralongus, which you'll see today, and that again looks extremely similar, but it doesn't have the little pinchers coming around the edge of the stem. So you look for all those little things and trying to narrow it down. Venation is important in some things to get things going parallel or pinnate here. That's another key to deciding where you're at. Dissected veins, we saw some of these at the beginning. Again, these are important. This is ranunculus, and then coontail and milfoil. And so those things sort of all look the same. So when you see them all together, these are really hard to tell apart sometimes if you haven't looked at them a lot. So you need to really look here at the base. This one's alternate. The leaf is here and another one's here. This is in a whorl around here. We got 4 of milfoil coming out of the stem, and this is ranunculus, which is a very different attachment. And stems can be different colors. There are different attachments to the root base. But one of the things is if we're having some real problems in Chautauqua Lake with some of the polygaetans, and this is kind of critical because one of the polygaetans we're finding in Chautauqua Lake is not endangered in New York State, but it's threatened. And so the group that doesn't want to use herbicides want to use that, versus the people that are using herbicides don't want to count that. They want to discount it, it's even there. Their group people never identify it. We find quite a bit of it. One of them is Polygaetan hilii, which generally was never found in western New York. But we finally, many years ago when we found it, we sent it to this blue book, Barry Hellquist, and he said, oh gosh, it's a great find. He didn't really give us clues on how he identified it, but he can just look at it and he can identify it. He's sort of the world's authority on polygaetans. But that particular plant has a flat stem, and it's not in the keys as having a flat stem particularly. It's in some keys, but not all keys. So that's one thing we sort of, we get these little tiny plants and sort of key on is like Polygaetan pusillus, another small plant you'll see back there, looks very similar, has a round stem. These are tiny, tiny stems, but flat and round, and so we can kind of key on those. Growth forms, today we only have one real emergent, and I brought that particular one because I think it's a plant that some lakes should be planting, especially Chautauqua, along the shore. But, so we're not going to get into looking at any emergent plants here today particularly, or we have a fair amount of floating leaf plants, and we have a ton of submerged plants, which mainly we're going to look at today. So, and all of us know about the emergent invasives, purple loosestrife, Japanese bamboo, and some of the cattails that are more invasive and so forth. So here's a list of some that are, we have knotweed, there's good knotweed, there's bad knotweed. That was the Japanese bamboo, which is not good. Purple loosestripes and invasive. And the common reed, there's the native and a non-native species. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time on some of these. Obviously, cattail, and it's important, really important in our wetlands, obviously, but it's important in lakes too. If we go to some windswept lake like Chautauqua, where every time it blows a wind, all the sediment at the end of the lake, whichever way it's blowing, is all being resuspended, phosphorus being resuspended up in there, the water column, and nutrients. And so we need to have more of this growing around instead of mowing their lawn right down to the lake shore. They need to have more emergence or some kind of buffer system there. So cattails obviously are in great. And then the knotweed we talked about. We have the polygonia, which has a pink flower. We see that along the shores. We also see a lot of lakes in Lamoka Lake. We run into a lot of it right out in the middle of their area. They're treating heavily with herbicides at the south, at the marshland in the south. And then, of course, a real tough one is the Japanese knotweed, which is just spreading everywhere in New York State. It's gone up every hill and dale, and it's really taking large areas. It's even just, I was just down at my brother's farm, which is our home farm originally, just north of the Pennsylvania border in north of 17. And they had cut some hay out along the stream, along the river, and they cut the hay down, and all of a sudden knotweed ran right across this huge field. And just this year alone, it had never been in the field before, but something there triggered it, and now the knotweed is only this tall right now with the second cutting, but it's coming up. So there's a lot of it there along the bank. So. And
I have a question. Is it common knotweed is not invasive, correct?
What's that?
The common knotweed is not.
No. Well, no, not the polygonia.
Yeah.
And so we have a lot of other emergents like arrowheads, and they do absolutely what we want them to do, look great, and hold the shoreline, and there are a lot of marsh areas and so forth. So we have a lot of those around. Same thing, peckleweed, nice looking plant, and so forth. Amazingly, we see a lot of these plants in the connection between Juanita and Lamoka Lakes. Juanita and Lamoka Lakes are heavily treated with herbicides. They have not been able to treat the connection between the two lakes, and amazingly, these things are still surviving and doing well in that connection between the lakes. Purple loosestripe, all of you are familiar with the long-term story here, and of course the great success that insects have been doing that have been released on purple loosestripe. Some of the initial work in the U.S. was done actually at the Cornell Ponds by a couple of young ladies, graduate students, way back with the first insects that were brought in. And the amazing thing was there, they just did a small release in a small area, but the next year we had lots of beetles moved around, and we had the first place where loosestripes sort of disappeared. And then eventually they had the federal wildlife people bought into it across the country. They started using it. Bernd Glassy did a tremendous amount of work in Europe before he came here, but also here after that point introduced those insects. So here's a place where biocontrol insects really works on this, and you'll have some loosestripes come popping through across the New York State eventually in some areas, but it doesn't take long before the insects move and take over. So this is a real success for biocontrol.
Excuse me? Do the insects, when they run out of purple loosestripe, go to anything else?
No, that was a criticism. So they get a few other things, some dogwoods or something, but it turns out I don't think there was any instance where they actually cause a decrease in any of them. So that was a concern. They had been tested before they were brought here on a lot of plants, but we probably didn't test them on all the plants. So there was a little bit of that, but now it's clearly a non-issue, but that's something they have to consider before we bring in any biocontrol. Bulrush is obviously another, many species of bulrushes and extremely important as a wetlands and lakeshore plant. Common reed, so everybody knows about all the phragmites. It's all along our roadways, sitting on the edges, and you go up around the thruway, and now it's moved down all from the thruway all the way down into toward the border, Pennsylvania border for sure. Extremely difficult to control, and really pushes out a lot of other plants that are around. And so then we'll switch over to some floating plants. And when you think about that, you usually think about lilies around the whitewater lily. We also have cow lily, spatterdock. One of the spatterdocks we have here today, yellow lily is common name. And of course, we have the duckweeds. We have a couple of duckweeds here today that you'll see. And then for invasive or non-native, you have the water chestnut, and I guess we don't have the European frogpit, right? We missed that.
We missed Marsilia quadrifolia.
Oh, okay, so we got the frogpit, not the... So then, of course, everybody knows about the whitewater lily, and of course, a lot of people are purchasing a lot of lilies from the internet, from the big lily company, and that sometimes causes some problems around we're getting these things. So some of those that may be hybridizing with the native, and so we're seeing all kinds of colors that are out there now.
Excuse me. Is this presentation available for us to view?
I can send it to you. You just give me your email afterwards.
Okay, thanks.
No, it's not out there anymore. There's a lot of editing I would do to it, maybe if I used it. And of course, spatterdock is here, which we have. Athena, we have that species here. One of the others that we normally find we didn't have with us. So again, very common. The duckweeds, obviously, not generally a problem in a big lake or anything because wind controls where these things go. So in a windswept lake, they're never going to make it except along the shore, but if you have a farm pond somewhere, they will cover the entire thing. And they're just tiny little plants here. Most have taproot coming down. Watermeal or wolfia, we weren't able to come up with any of that. That's very common, sort of granular thing, granular little thing that covers small ponds very rapidly. In European frogpit, there's more concern here in New York State with that now. We're looking at this particularly in Cazenovia Lake, where it's moving around. We found it there about 4 to 5 years ago, and it's increasing pretty rapidly there from one source. So again, it becomes a problem when it looks like this. It actually grows only in shallow areas, but it really dominates as a monoculture. Yellow floating heart, we don't have any of that today, but again, a similar issue with this one. It can dominate that wetlands. Water chestnut, we do have, we're fortunate to go to the north end of the lake. We were looking for, we have a painting back there, the aquatic moth that we can talk about, which we think is a control of Eurasian water milfoil in Cayuga Lake. And we were up there to look for moths and maybe pick up any plants. And up there, we decided to go a little bit further south to Canoga Marsh, where they've had water chestnut there, and so we wanted to pick up. We found there was last year. They've been managing that for a few years, but last year we saw scattered plants there when we were doing a survey in June for Seneca County, 1st of July for hydrilla. So we went and we picked up one of those. So we have one of those, which obviously can become quite a problem. We used to do, remember working initially on Oneida Lake, many years ago, we were trying to get rid of a small bay of water chestnut, and now, probably it's 15, 20 years later, it's still an annual thing in Oneida trying to harvest out the water chestnut by hand in a lot of places. They've used some herbicides up there at the outlet and so forth, testing of that over the years. But again, this can become quite a problem. And they have these nutlets on them. I think ours has a nutlet, and that is very sharp. And so if you're swimming or something, or it's around where you want to wade in the water, this thing is really like a needle. So, causing problems.
Before you move on to the next,
What's that?
before you move on, I
Yeah.
just have a question. I'm going to call them lily pads, but whatever. We have 10 miles of shoreline, but we have lily pads only in 2 locations that are maybe 200-300 feet. Do they have a substrate preference or something? Why would they be in such small areas that maybe outside?
Well, they do like substrate that's fine and loose and mucky, rather than something that's gravel or stone. So they're it's also protection from wind. So if there's any protection from an area where they get blown away, they can't stand high wind. That's why they're generally close to shore on large lakes. And depth also eventually prevents them from moving out real deep. Although they can be, I've seen them in probably 10 feet of water, in some cases, whitewater lilies.
So do they spread naturally?
Oh, yeah, no, mainly they don't just take off like water milfoil, for example, a fragment breaks off a little tiny nose, it may be blown down several miles. This one generally has to expand from the rhizomes, so just, that bed just gets bigger and bigger and bigger. There's easy ways to control lilies without the use of herbicides, you can do.
No, I wasn't concerned about controlling.
Oh.
It just seems strange to me because all our other macrophytes are kind of...
Right. So I think it generally has to go from the rhizome slowly expands out from the areas. And so we're going to talk about a lot of these plants that are on here, Elodea, Hydrilla, Cudeo, Milfoil, NYISAW. We don't have any fanwort. There's obviously, that's moving around a lot. There's always been a lot of it around Albany. And there's some up 81 north of Syracuse in the lake or two. So Albany, it's been there a long time, around several lakes there. We have a bladderwort, and we have some, this is ranunculus, crowfoot, pondweeds, water stargrass, papegrass. So we'll be seeing all those today. These are ones that I think you can become really familiar with and be able to identify after this. And then waterweed here, I just call it LED anymore, and in fact, we don't separate anymore. We used to separate canadensis, which is the LED we always had in New York State, and sort of a big leaf. We don't separate that anymore from the Talii. It's one plant that we don't go down to the species because we don't know what it is, because they've changed, maybe hypersized, I don't know, but they've clearly changed. So almost all of our LED and most of our lakes now look like the Talii. They're little thin leaf, small, we have an example here, and not big and robust like canadensis. So we just call everything Elodea SP, and we don't try to figure out if it's a hybrid or whatever. But this is the one that's very confusing with Elodea, or with Hydrilla and Ithaca. And then Hydrilla, we talked about that at the beginning. This was, I think you can see this, this is Cascadilla Creek, looking back up toward the hill, and Cornell's over here. The farmer's market is right here, off here. If you've been in Ithaca, this is a big boat yard. It's across the way. Right over in here, it's 6 to 8 feet in depth. The Hydrilla in 2011, when they found this piece in the inlet, was like this. This is it. on the, I think we found it, the young lady found it on the 5th. I think on the 11th, this is one of my photos on the 11th. And then there's another photo here on one of the tables showing it going up Linderman Creek, which is by Cass Park on the west shore, solid up the creek to Route 89. So the thing had really taken off. And you'll see, we do have a little bit of that today. And the big issue there are the tubers that it puts down. Once it gets about this tall in the summer, then it starts producing tubers. And it has, and some of our work down in Ithaca, it was producing tubers some years well into October or November. We were getting a huge production of tubers, a little bit smaller, but they all germinate. So it's a real aggressive one, and it's one that's being attempted to be managed around the lake now intensively.
I have
Around
a
the
question.
same.
I have a question about that last slide. So that's all hydrilla. So, what I point out to people is, to the right, it's all bunched in, and then to the left, it's very, like I call it leggy, right? So, is that an older plant, that leggy one on the left there?
Well, that plant, yeah, that's what we took out on the day, actually the day it was discovered, next day. So that's a plant that was growing. See, that would have been in here. So that would have been about a plant 5 feet tall. So like that, it's tall. So most of anything that people are going to find, if they find something out there now, they're going to be looking at this. So this is actually a fragment we found in the south in Cuba Lake, I don't know, maybe a couple years ago now or less. So what we're doing is, it's just a tiny, tiny plant down there just starting up. And it's very, this plant here, obviously, the leaves are not curled under. This particular one has the kind of typical thing that everybody shows in photographs of this claw-like thing with the plant and the leaves going down underneath. This is what we see out in Cayuga Lake when it's growing. It looks, these leaves look exactly like Natalia, except there is a leaf or two here that has more than 3.
That's why I bring it to people's attention, because it looks very different, the age of the plant and everything.
Right, oh, absolutely. And hydrilla at this height has only 3 leaves. So when it first comes out of the tuber, it comes up right here, it's just got 3 leaves. 3 very pointed leaves, but only 3. And then over the next week and a half, it starts going into more of this form. And a piece that we just found down, in the first piece we found this year, in the stuff we're managing, the south end of Cayuga, was very robust and curled under like that.
Thank you.
It's tough to find it at this time of the year. It's easier to find it in the fall because it just gets bigger. Larger. And then these are just some shots I have. These are, this is a this is a turion, and this is a turion. So we refer mainly to the ones that are in the soil that have this really sharp thing here. The technical name, the scientific name, everything that everybody refers to in the literature would be subterranean turion, or a tuber that's in the soil. This one is actually a tuber, and this one that's growing up on the plant. And so we haven't seen very many of those in the last several years, but in 2011 and 12, we had huge numbers of these turions, vegetative turions, sitting up on the plant in the Cayuga Inlet. And those, when they break off and stuff, just float out to the lake. So that's about. We don't see a lot of that anymore, except if you're in really dense stands, they'll start forming these aerial turions. And the other thing I might point out is our hydrilla that's in New York State is monaceous rather than dioecious is what they mainly have in the south, up to the probably Maryland now, most of the south. There is some monaceous in the Carolinas now. It's moving down, and the dioecious is moving around all over the place. We don't have much dioecious. Dioecious originally came from Sri Lanka, brought in with the aquarium trade into Florida. The monaceous came from Korea, and I'm not, it's a little unclear, but I think that came in with the Park Service in the Chesapeake. And then sort of moved, they thought it was they thought it was Eldia. And so they were reforesting the Chesapeake Bay, which lost a lot of plants many years ago, trying to do that, and they planted in the stuff which turned out to be hydraulic. And so eventually it moved up here. And milfoils, we'll talk about that. Eurasian water milfoil, Lyricum spicatum, has been our major aquatic plant problem in New York State for a long time. Probably came into the state in the early 1960s. I think we found some first, some grad students they sent out from Cornell picked some up in, I think it was 1966 probably, from one of the western Finger Lakes, and brought it back and didn't tell me. They put it in our marsh at Cornell Ponds, and that thing eventually took over this 12-acre marsh in 2 years. And that's the first we had seen it. We were, but then in the late 60s, most of our lakes in the Finger Lakes area had Eurasian water milfoil. It was being referred to as the native milfoil at that time. Sibericum, which was at that time was called exuldescens, but everybody thought it was that. But it turned out in the 60s we made that switch to Eurasian almost everywhere in the center part of the state. Variable milfoil, I'm mentioning this, we still consider it a native. It's a native technique in New York. It's been around. But however, there are lots of people in New York in the plant professions and plant regulations that would like to address it as, it obviously is invasive, but it's non-native or an exotic, for example. This is the major aquatic plant problem in Maine and New Hampshire. This is their Eurasian water milfoil. So this thing is takes off like crazy. We have some of that here today. Now we found up in Lake Bonaparte the other day doing insect sampling. Turns out Bonaparte has Eurasian water milfoil where we have a lot of weevils. They're keeping that population in check long term. But we noticed we started to pick up a lot more heterophyll. It's a real concern for the people in the Adirondacks, because in the Adirondacks, this is taking over major lakes and really closing them. Unfortunately, there's not, our insects don't really like this plant. And then, again, ranunculus, won't dwell on these too much. Eelgrass or Vallisneria, which we'll have some of this back here. It's a desirable plant, especially for habitat for fish and vertebrates and so forth. Fanwort is the one I talked about that is a real problem around the Albany area. It has been a long time, but it's also in other parts of the state, slowly moving. Coontails, native. We have a lot of that in most of our Finger Lakes. Generally a desirable plant. We are seeing in some places where we don't have a lot of clarity to the water. This one is actually increasing somewhat because this one doesn't have any true roots. It has a hold fast. In the wintertime it falls to the bottom and the sediment comes around it and it grows up from that. But it doesn't have any true roots. And so this one can make it to the surface and float. It's free floating or anything, but it can get up there and get all the light that it needs. So it's not shaded out by these dense phytoplankton blooms we see around. So that is increasing in some areas. And we see it increasing possibly in Juanita Mocha lakes where they're using continuous herbicides. That's not targeted by the herbicides, and so that one has an advantage. NYISAW, this one really has an advantage, and this is Most likely a Juanita Lake, and this is NYISAW guadalupensis, or southern naiad. Technically it's a native here. And this one took off after they started the second round. They used some herbicides early on in 2003, which defoliated Juanita for about 3 or 4 years. And then in 2005, they had milfoil came back like gangbusters, massive plant. They switched to another herbicide, triclopyr or Renovate, which they have used to this day. And what that did within the first 2 years, use of Renovate, it released this plant NYISAW, which is generally in Chautauqua Lake and most of our Finger Lakes, we see it about this tall. In Juanita, we have it growing out to 20 feet. We have it in 6 to 10 feet, it's solid at the surface. So the Juanita Lake's shaped like a bathtub, it's all the way around it. I'm not sure that they should have gotten rid of their milfoil, but this one's really bad. So this one is normally a tiny little plant, doesn't do much. It does increase, but I would think the use of herbicide obviously released it to plant. Next year, this Paul Lord that worked with me at that time, Paul came back, wanted to do some diving. He dove in and came out like a monster. He came out laughing like crazy. He said, "Oh my gosh, they got a new plant in their lake," and because both of us had been taken to task by this lake association as not being supportive of their herbicides, and we had all kinds of, I had some threats, and I had some mail delivered with no stamps to my post office box. Now, I never worked with them again because I was just sort of telling him the true story before all this happened. So he was really laughing about this, but I said, "No, Paul, that's just nice." But the plant, instead of being 3/8 of an inch long leaf up to half, the leaves were 1 inch long plus. And plus the plant is really robust, and the plant is like, this is one rake toss, hard to get it into the boat, real dense. So that's some of the side effects. Water stargrass, another important native. We have it in most of our lakes. We'll have that here today. In the pondweeds, we have it's the largest group of species in one genus of submerged aquatic plants. There are just a lot of those, and so, and some are very different. Curly pondweed is the non-native invasive, came into the U.S. about in the 1800s, and is still very aggressive and is around. We always see it early in the season. In June, it's usually at the surface in a lot of our lakes. It then flowers, it forms turions or little winter buds. Which are these leaf things turn into hard buds, and those things go down, and they are what propagate the plant, let it start next year. But it generally dies out by the 4th of July. This thing is decaying and falling down, and is out of the water column. Other lilies, our other pondweeds here, some of these we have with us today. You'll see those. All native. Pusillus here is one we have that we're having a hard time identifying from some other 2 little Potamogetans that are in Western New York, and in our lakes here. Pusillus, Hilii, and Foliosus all look the same in the spring. Sago pondweed, which used to be called Potamogeton pectinatus, is now in a different genus, Tachynia. That's showing up right at this time of the year. That would be at the surface in a lot of our lakes. Some dense, it's becoming dense in some areas of Chautauqua Lake now. But it's a huge seed producer, so if you look at it, it has massive seeds on it. Extremely, all Potamogetans are really good ducks. Bladderwort, a little bit different plant. Generally find them in more acidic waters, and we do have some bladderwort here. I think bladderwort came from Tinker, right?
Yep.
So at Tinker Nature Park in Rochester, we're treating hydrilla with barriers. So they have a nature park where someone most likely dumped an aquarium at the end of the path and had this massive hydrilla outbreak. And so we put a barrier, complete barrier over an acre of the pond. And the one plant that's still there and surviving is Flabberby. And we got macroalgaes. This is more like Cara that you find, the really skunk grass, or if you squeeze it, it has a real good smell. Extremely valuable, important plant. I would advise people not to try to control that one or not get rid of it, because wherever Cara is, if you have a big bed of Cara, it's very hard for Eurasian water milfoil to survive in it. It just, from allelopathy, from the plant and so forth, milfoil doesn't make it. A lot of other plants don't make it. So if you have big beds of Cara, be thankful about that. Nightella is another stonewort macroalgae, a little bit more fragile. Starry stonewort, everybody's concerned about that now. Nightella obtusa, it's taking off everywhere. It used to be a huge problem many years ago, and it still is, in the south end of Lake Ontario, between Syracuse and Rochester. Several groups there 25, 30 years ago have been trying to control it around their dock areas. And this now is dense in most of our lakes. Wherever it is, it's spreading. But this time of the year, it's very tiny. But within 3 weeks, it'll be pretty massive. And it crowds out other species. It's very difficult for anything to grow. It'll take over in areas that are bare first, and then it slowly pushes back. At the south end of Cube Lake that we're monitoring intensively for the hydrilla project, this is the plant that's taken off over the last 5 or 6 years, increased its acreage from maybe dense in 5 or 6 acres to dense in several hundred acres. So, and it's in most of Cayuga Lake. It's at the north end, it's at Aurora, and in most of our lakes. So this one came into the U.S. in 1983 into the Great Lakes. It moved up and jumped into Michigan. It filled all of Michigan's ponds and lakes. And they have been trying to come up with some answer to that since then for over 30 years and haven't come up with it. And then just to finish up, again, I want to emphasize we have these various sources up there that are out there, available, or on the internet. Look for those. Well, with that,
Here at Finger Lakes Institute, I have a macrophyte survey program that we started last year as a pilot program, and I just started it within the Finger Lakes. So the 11 Finger Lakes, I got 7 of the Finger Lakes participated last year, and I had 13 volunteers total, and we did it for 3 months. So we did it June, July, and August, and the volunteers had to go out and just throw a rake toss and pull the rake toss up and just identify the plants. And they were looking for 3 species. They were looking for water chestnut, starry stonewort, and hydrilla. You know, volunteering, it's personal time, and I want to keep it as simple as possible, but it's just a great citizen science function that gets everybody out there. You know, we all love our lakes. We go out to the end of our dock. We don't know what's out there. We see all these green plants and we don't know what's out there. Like Hillary says, you go out in your lawn and you know where all the dandelions are. But when you go to the end of your dock, you don't know what's out there. So it's just getting people exposure, just like today, walking around and looking at all those plants and feeling them and looking at them again and again and again, become better versed at what they are. And if you walk away today, you know one plant, that's awesome, right? So the macrophyte survey program, logistically it worked out. They did a rake toss once a week, so it was 4 hits of data a month for 3 months. And that was kind of a lot. So this year, because as Bob has said, a lot of plants are up much later into the season, October and November. So I'm doing it for 5 months this time. We're into the end of October. This program is going to run. And what I do is I have 26 volunteers this year, which is awesome. I have 13 in Schuyler County, and that's Lamoka Lake, Juanita Lake, which Bob has enlightened me about those lakes today with herbicide treatments and things like that, and Cayuga Lake. And then I have 13 volunteers in the Finger Lakes region, Canisius Lake, Cayuga Lake, Honeywell Lake, maybe Loon Lake, and Hemlock Lake, maybe. I think Jean might be doing Hemlock Lake. So that's really awesome. We're going to do it for 5 months in through the end of October, and we're going to do one toss every 2 weeks. So that's minimal. So what I do is, this is a kit that I give out. We have backpacks. There's a lot of resources, like Bill's handing out, you know, at the end of the session. A lot of reference materials. We give you a rake and a bin, watch cards, a little hand lens, everything that you need to go out on your canoe or kayak or at the end of your dock or wherever you're going to throw that rake, and you have everything you need to do this rake toss. So this was last year, and this was some of our volunteers. We're looking for starry stonewort, we're looking for hydrilla, and we're looking for water chestnut, which is the same thing we're going to do this year. So these are data sheets. So we do have IMAP invasives. I don't know if everyone's aware of IMAP invasives, but we are using IMAP invasives this year to document any invasives you find. But if not, a lot of people don't want to do that. We have data sheets as well. Every 2 weeks, so I'm going to send out a newsletter every 2 weeks to let you know, to let the volunteers know what's going on, like what's going on in Schuyler County, what's going on in Cayuga Lake, which is really cool. I gave everybody's email addresses and phone numbers so you can communicate, you know, across the lakes and across the regions if you got any questions about stuff. So I think the newsletter would be really good. So they have to throw within one block. Block 4 is 2 weeks. You got to throw a rake sometime between those 2 weeks. So, and then to send a newsletter out just about, oh, Joe found bladderwort the other day, and then give a link to that so people can look up bladderwort and see what it is. So it's a really good program. You know, Hillary talked about bullying our waterways. You know, hydrilla. You know, Bob talked about that. This is water chestnut, and these are the nutlets that Bob was talking about. So we have, Kate runs our water chestnut program, and we have the strike team. This is a giant plant. This plant was like this big. You grab it, you pick it up, you flip it upside down, this is what you're going to see. And these are all the nutlets that are not ripe yet, but they will fall in August, if I'm right, in August. So we want to get them before they fall into the sediment to make more plants. And these are the nutlets that Bob was talking about that are very sharp. So water chestnut poles, we have many of them scheduled this summer, if anyone is interested. And it's a good way to get out there and really see the plants. Starry stonewort, you know, Bob mentioned starry stonewort. This is the little fruiting body, the little bulbil that you'll see. Looks very big there, but this is actually how small it is. So this is one of the things that the volunteers are looking for. I'm promoting Invasive Species Awareness Week. That's all this week. And if you go to fingerlakesinvasives.org or stoptheinvasionny.com, you can see all the events listed through Saturday. Lots of stuff going on in the region, everywhere. You know, and then my spiel is, why should we care? You know, my spiel is about stewardship, right? Because we all are here because we love our lakes, because we're environmentalists. You don't have to be a scientist, you don't have to have an environmental background, you just have to have the passion and really care about the planet. You know, when I talk to little kids, I talk to them about, you know, loving Mother Earth and all that stuff, and they buy it, which is awesome. You know, but all of these reasons, you know, this is my kayak on Lake Ontario, I have a cottage on Lake Ontario, and that's my serenity, you know. Osprey only eat fish. If we don't have fresh water, we're not going to have any osprey. You know, eagles are the same thing. So, you know, people are like, why should I care? Why should I get involved? And this is just my spiel that I give to everyone. And then about IMAP invasives, those of you that aren't aware of this program, if you go to NYISAW invasives, I believe I have another slide. If you go to NYIMAPinvasives.org, you can read about this, this data program. and it's really awesome. Anybody can do it. You don't have to be really computer literate. It takes a little while to get the program and figure out how it works, but it's all about showing where invasive species are. So the DEC, they have fact sheets, and on those fact sheets they have a distribution map of the state that shows where all the invasives are of a certain species. They get their data from this, from IMAP Invasive. So when you are out, they have an app you can put on your phone now. So when you're out kayaking or canoeing or hiking, and you see something that you think is an invasive, you can take a picture and you can submit that observation, and someone will get back to you and let you know if it was invasive, what it is. So it's a really awesome program. So if anyone is interested, I did talk to Mark from Cayuga Lake, and I know a few of you are in the program, the Macrophyte Survey program, but if anybody in their lake wants to know more about it, I'm going to hook up with Mark and maybe go down to Cayuga Lake and do a training down there and get some people involved. So if anybody's interested, feel free to talk to me after the program. Okay?
I live on Cayuga Lake in Canoga, and several years ago we started to get more and more with our macrophytes on the beach, and they would wash up on shore a couple feet deep, and then they would decay and smell a great deal, so they were going septic. And so I started to ask questions about why this was happening, and as time went on I found out that there was quite a few different groups and things you could participate in, so I got more and more involved. To where today I'm doing testing for sea slap and doing stream testing with CSI, as well as other things that I'm involved with the lake quality. I've learned a great deal, and it's helped me to recognize that some of it is just nature working its way, and other things are more invasive and deteriorous to the lake quality and that sort of thing. So that's what I've been doing. That's why I'm here today.
My name is Bill Ebert. I live on Cayuga Lake, and I have a lakefront cottage, and I have seen recently more and more macrophytes. And this is concerning because if you're a boater, a swimmer, these things can interfere with your enjoyment of the lake. So I am here to learn more about the macrophyte community and how it can be controlled, how it can be reported, and I've learned a lot here today.
Hi, I'm Naomi.
And I'm Jake, and we are both rising juniors from Cornell University studying environmental and sustainability sciences. And we are both interns this summer with the New York State Institute for Invasive Species Research, or NYISAW. And basically what we're doing this summer is we are doing research into different invasive species and creating best management practice guides to be disseminated to land managers and people in the invasive species field.
PRISM leaders, that's
PRISM leaders, yeah. Give them the most updated information on best ways to manage these different species.
I care because I want to have a lake that I can pass down to my children and grandchildren and be fine, recreational, and clean, water quality good.
I care.
I care. I care.
I care.
I care.
And I do care about Cayuga Lake and the Finger Lakes.